Today we're going to be discussing French literature. So first we're going to go over an introduction, and then we'll move into the Middle Ages, and that's all we'll get done today in the first 5 minutes. And then I'll go over the group project at the end. Introduction to French literature. The French language may be regarded as a modern form of Latin. The Latin genius has seemed to hover over the development of French culture and determine its destinies. It has influenced the French people, their love of order, clarity, and reasonableness, their instinctive avoidance of extremes, the qualities which are most noticeable in their literature. Of all modern literatures, French is most naturally classical. The French have always taken ideas and aesthetic matters seriously. Therefore, their literature is best from which to study literary movements, which is what we're studying through this thematic unit. The earliest French literature dates back to the 11th century. The Song of Roland, of unknown authorship, is known to be the national epic of France. The most famous French narrative poet in the Middle Ages was Chrétien de Troyes. So that's a brief introduction to French literature. Now we'll move on to the Middle Ages. French prose in the Middle Ages was employed mainly in chronicles and history. The drama in France, as in other countries of Europe, was in origin the offspring of the church, though the two later became foes, the church and the dramas. The earliest plays were simply dramatizations of the ritual, particularly that were related to Christmas and Easter. The plays then were transferred from the church to open air, and French was substituted for Latin, in which the drama inevitably developed along lines of its own. So the drama went on to change as it broke away from the church into its own type of thing. We'll move on to the 16th century of French literature. In 1515 to 1547, the Renaissance came to France in the reign of Francis I. The final disruption of feudalism, the introduction of the printing press, and the discovery of Italian culture were among the most important causes then. It seemed as if the Protestant Reformation would also permeate the country, but by the end of the century, the French people had decided to remain Catholic. As far as literature, the Renaissance was in the direction of classicism. During this time, a group of writers known as the Pliable published a manifesto in 1550, which laid down the program of the school. The leading poet of the movement, Ronsard, was a genuine lyricist in his shorter verses. Poetic tragedies were written, carefully observing the unities of plot, time, and place. The type of play flourished in France with no opposition for nearly 300 years. The great French writers of the 16th century used prose, such as Rabelais and Montaigne. Montaigne is the first great essayist of modern times. We'll finish today with the Golden Age. The Golden Age coincided with the long reign of Louis X. From 1643 to 1715, France was beyond question the leading country in Europe, both politically and culturally. Also, France led Europe in government, religion, and literature. The classical ideas of order, clarity, sense of proportion, and good taste were and still are congenial to the French mind. Pascal arose during this time, who besides being a profound thinker is perhaps the greatest master of French prose. Literature in the Golden Age was essentially aristocratic in its outlook. To this day, an understanding of the spirit of the great age and an appreciation of its masterpieces is still considered by the France to be a hallmark of true culture. So we just went over an introduction to French literature, the Middle Ages, the 16th century in the Golden Age.